Hey everyone, this is Nick and welcome back to your weekly Linux and open source news video. So this week we have a new vulnerability that lets Flatpak applications potentially escape the sandbox, so check on your updates. We have news about the Cosmic desktop environment and how it will integrate other applications from other desktops, especially with theming. And we also have Gentoo flat out refusing to add anything AI generated, and they're kinda backed up by Nvidia Torvalds himself. And we also have this segue to our sponsor. If you're a Linux user and you want to replace your computer, stop looking at devices that come with Windows pre-installed and start looking at manufacturers that actually officially support Linux, like Tuxedo computers. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they have a big range of devices that come with Linux pre-installed, and they also submit patches upstream and have repos so you can make sure that all the hardware works on any distribution. You can pick from a wide variety of components, you can have your own custom keyboard layout added onto the laptop, you can have your own logo engraved on the lid, and you have plenty of models to choose from. My entire channel is run on one of their laptops, the InfinityBook Pro 16, and all my gaming is done on one of their Tuxedo cubes. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux, and you want to support a company that actively supports Linux, click the link in the description below and check out Tuxedo computers. Okay, so a new vulnerability in Flatpak was found, which lets applications escape the sandbox. Technically, that is the main point of Flatpak apps, at least for users. For developers, it's package once, distribute everywhere. The point is, applications run in a sandbox and they can only use portals to interact with the rest of the system. But this time, using the XDG desktop portal interface, it looks like some applications could find a way to bypass that sandbox. Applications have the ability to append the -- command parameter, and this is the issue. It can be used to execute additional commands, including running programs outside of the sandbox. So a Flatpak app could give you a sense of security because it is sandboxed, but it could then use some arguments to run something else and harm your system. The Flatpak team has already submitted a patch for this, for all supported versions, which is basically anything above 1.10.9, so if you run an old version, absolutely upgrade either your distro or your Flatpak version. There's even a simple test to see if your system is currently affected. You can run any Flatpak app by using Flatpak run, followed by the name of your app, then -- command equals -- help, followed by the application's full name, like something like org.gnome.whatever. If the command returns an error telling you the help command cannot be found, then your system is safe. If not, then you need to update your system. Hopefully your distro should have updated packages soon. It is not really uncommon to find vulnerabilities in any piece of software, but those hurt a bit more when they affect the sandbox of a packaging format whose entire point for users is to be sandboxed. We also have news about Cosmic before it gets its first alpha in May, and the big one is that they've added theming support. Applications built with GTK3 and GTK4, whether they're packaged as Flatpak or through regular deb packages for Pop! OS, they will all be able to be themed if the users wants that. There's a dedicated option in the appearance settings, and that's pretty nice. It was one of my main questions about Cosmic. How would it handle apps made for other desktops, and would everything look completely disjointed? So it looks like you will at least get the same colors and general style in GTK apps. It doesn't mean applications will all feel like they were made by the same people, but at least visually there will be a form of consistency. You will also be able to change icon themes, of course, and this will apply to both Cosmic applications and GTK applications. There's no news on KDE apps theming for now though. They also showcase the Cosmic App Store and its basic UI, and it's nothing too different from what you know. There's a sidebar for categories and a main panel with the application details or the list of apps. They've also implemented super plus mouse drag to move windows around, which is really nice, and the settings got some more love, with the keyboard settings being now implemented. They're also getting some non-System76 contributions, it looks like, as someone submitted touchpad gestures to switch workspaces, and thumbnail previews for open windows in the dock, and also screen edge window tiling and maximizing, including half and quarter tiling. There are also contributions for new applications that don't come from System76. There's a new Cosmic Tasks app, which might be the very first third-party app made using libcosmic, and there are other in the works, like a clipboard manager, a fan control app, or an emoji selector. As per the compositor, it got some fixes for Nvidia support, for XWayland, for screen capture, for keyboard LEDs, and for touchscreens. And performance seems on par for gaming, at least with Cyberpunk 2077, with the current version of Cosmic based on GNOME, which isn't necessarily a great thing, because the current version of Cosmic is based on GNOME 42, which is 2 years old and misses a lot of performance improvements and fixes, notably for Wayland and XWayland. Still, that is very solid progress here, and it's nice to know that applications will be correctly themed inside of the desktop. I was afraid of Cosmic offering a very weird experience with their own style, plus GTK apps, plus Qt apps, plus anything that isn't even from these toolkits, so it is nice to see that they paid attention to that. I'm not expecting Cosmic to be as full-featured as something as GNOME or its ecosystem of apps, or even KDE. It's not going to be remotely as full-featured as KDE when it has its first stable version, but at least it looks like the fundamentals are here and it should be a totally usable option when it comes out. Now, it seems like Gentoo developers are not fans of AI, as they've now implemented a complete ban on AI-assisted contributions to the distro. Any content, not just code, that used AI in the process of its creation is now prohibited. And the reasons are the ones that everyone with half a mind can point out to when discussing the current state of AI tools. There's the copyright problem, as accepting contributions that used AI might create legal problems in the future if a country or another rules that training AI on public content breaches copyright laws. The second issue is quality related. AI can't always generate high-quality code or high-quality images or any form of content, which means it is not up to the task of what Gentoo developers want to work with. It could add an extra burden when reviewing the accuracy of AI-assisted contributions. Finally, there's the ethical problem. AI training uses enormous amounts of power and water to cool all the data centers down, and until the potential copyright infringement issue is settled, it would be unethical to base your product on these tools. There's also the issue of AI disrupting jobs, creating a decline in service quality by replacing humans with chatbots, and making scams and spam problems even worse. And Linus Torvalds is also skeptical of the current AI hype, saying in a recent interview that it's hilarious to watch, and also that current AI is just autocorrect on steroids. Much like Gentoo, his position is, let's wait 10 years and see where it actually goes before making all these crazy announcements. And in the end, I just can't disagree with either Linus Torvalds or the Gentoo developers here. AI can be a fantastic tool, and at some point it might be trained on data ethically sourced, where they actually got the permissions to use that to train their AI. At some point, it might also only use renewable energy, and that won't be as much of a problem. But right now, I'm definitely not sure the benefits outweigh the problems, and so I think it's sane to try and wait to see how this thing goes. Now, Framework, makers of the modular and repairable laptops, are having a bit of trouble with the software part of the equation. Drivers apparently remain stuck to their initial version from a year ago, meaning that users are just not getting any bug fixes, battery life or performance improvements, or even security updates. Now, that part is mostly for Windows users, because on Linux the necessary drivers are in the kernel and they don't really depend on Framework themselves. But when it comes to the BIOS, Linux and Windows users are equally affected. As an example, the latest version of the Framework Laptop 13 just got a BIOS update, a year and a half after it was released, and after the company announced that all the USB-C ports that you can add to that laptop would also be Thunderbolt ports. Except they weren't, because they needed that BIOS update for that to work. And the BIOS update also included a fix for the quite nasty logo fail vulnerability way too late after it was disclosed. And these kind of issues repeat on virtually every update, with the company announcing a new update that will add support for newer parts or fix problems, and this version always arriving months, if not a full year behind schedule. And for Linux users, a BIOS updater app never even happened, meaning that Framework themselves told some Linux users to swap their Linux SSD for one with Windows on it, to update the BIOS this way, and then resume using Linux. And that's just not a good look. The very point of Framework laptops is to be able to slot in new cards, new motherboards, new ports, just basically change the components. And for that to work properly, you need not only driver updates for Windows users, but also BIOS updates to take advantage of all of this. And it's also very important for security reasons. So not having a way to update that BIOS on Linux and not delivering on these updates as a whole is a pretty bad look. Now, the company did take this problem into account. They apparently sent emails to a bunch of their customers saying they are aware of the issue, they're working to fix it, but for now it's kind of a mess. Now, Ben Skeggs, the longtime Nouveau driver maintainer who resigned a few months back, found employment at Nvidia. That's not super surprising because he basically worked on Nvidia drivers for a decade, even though it was for an open source driver, and that work was basically full reverse engineering, which is super impressive, and it's probably the kind of person you want to hire to work on your official drivers. So that's something. But also, Ben just contributed a series of 156 patches to the Nouveau drivers this week, to clean up the code for GSP support, which was his last previous contribution to Nouveau that enabled the drivers to actually get decent performance on recent Nvidia GPUs. What's also interesting is that all that new code was submitted from Ben's Nvidia work address as well, meaning it is not impossible that his work is now sponsored by Nvidia, or maybe it was part of his contract with them to let him work on the Nouveau drivers. And it is fantastic to see Ben contributing to Nouveau, and it would be even more fantastic if it meant that Nvidia is actually taking a stance on helping Nouveau get better, because if Ben's work on those drivers has been sponsored or funded by Nvidia while he's working there, it means they're actually taking open source drivers seriously now. It is sort of confusing because Nvidia does have their own open source kernel modules that aren't baked into the kernel, but apparently work relatively well, so why would they fund contributions to something else? But it's still pretty interesting to follow. I guess time will tell. And let's finish this with the gaming news. First, it looks like the new NTSYNC driver will be merged in the Linux kernel 6.10. I talked about this driver a while back because it looks like it might give pretty big improvements in terms of frame rates when you're playing Windows games on Linux through Wine. It basically implements a Windows-like system at the kernel level to handle synchronization primitives. It's not run as a user process, which would be potentially bottlenecked, it's run as a virtual device in the kernel. And potential improvements could go up to 678% for Dirt 3, 196% for Resident Evil 2, 34% for Total War Troy, and basically any game that runs with Wine would get good benefits out of this. Now, this new driver does the same thing as eSync or F-Sync as far as I understand it, but at a lower level with better performance and less potential issues. So unless Linus Torvalds objects to this code, it should land in the kernel 6.10, at which point we could all benefit from solid gaming performance. And it will be interesting to see how well it compares with F-Sync or eSync, because all those big performance boosts were compared with using bog standard Wine, but Proton does come with equivalent solutions that are run as user processes. So having this comparison will be very interesting. I'm pretty sure this new solution will be more efficient, but we'll have to wait for Proton and Wine to be updated to actually take advantage of it. And we also have some really solid progress on FEX, the x86 emulator for ARM platforms. Basically the only and best way we have right now to play games on ARM64 computers on Linux. It takes an x86 executable and it translates its calls to ones that an ARM CPU can understand. The developers have released version 24.04, and it brings better performance when it comes to memory usage, but also for CPU usage with just-in-time optimizations that should deliver about 3% faster performance in games. The big change though is the speed with which FEX can read from and write to memory. With the new update, it can take these operations from a speed of about 3 GB per second up to 88 gigabytes per second, which will obviously be a big improvement for anyone using FEX. Developers also showcased God of War 2018 running on ARM64 on an Nvidia Tegra Orin with an AMD Radeon Pro W7500 GPU. And the frame rate doesn't look super stable. I would eyeball it as running closer to 30 than to 60 FPS, but they didn't really include an FPS counter or anything, so it is hard to say. And that's still pretty impressive, because the Tegra Orin is a little bit more powerful than a Raspberry Pi, but not by much. So even coupled with a dedicated AMD GPU, being able to run a relatively recent game at about okay frame rates is pretty nice. Remember that something like the Steam Deck just cannot run God of War 2018 at 60 FPS, whatever the settings, at least not reliably. So being able to do that on a relatively small integrated board is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing like you would be if you decided to click the like button, the subscribe button, to leave a comment, or to turn on notifications to stay informed of all new videos. And if you wanted to be even more amazing, you could check out all the links in the description of the video to support the channel. If you become a Patreon member or a YouTube member, you will get access to a daily version of this exact same show from Monday to Friday. So check this out. In the meantime, thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!